Hola,
Hi, great. Good to meet you.
perfecto, perfecto, doctor de Grey, ¿ya me escuchas bien? ¿Todo está preparado?
Yes, everything's great.
Ok.
It's my pleasure.
Quisiera empezar preguntándote algo que me parece inicial al principio, y es, ¿qué fue lo que te motivó? ¿Cuál fue el detonante que hizo que tú quisieras investigar sobre la longevidad y sobre la posibilidad de curación de la vejez y de reversión de la vejez? ¿Cuál fue la motivación que te hizo iniciar en esto?
My main motivation was the discovery that nobody else was trying to do it, or hardly anybody else. That was when I was about 30. At that time, I was not a biologist. I was a computer scientist. But I met and married a biologist in 1990. And through her, I discovered that biologists were mostly not interested in aging, and they were not trying to do anything about it. And I thought that that was crazy, so I switched fields.
Bueno, es algo que sí, suena un poquito loco, pero también es por la percepción que pienso que las personas tienen de la vejez, ya que el envejecimiento se ha tomado como algo que se tiene que aceptar porque parece inevitable y tal vez por eso falta mucho interés en el estudio de cómo revertirlo o de cómo poder curarlo en un futuro. Eh, Eso está, pues en mi opinión, por eso me parece un campo que aún no está suficientemente explorado por los demás.
That is largely true. People do not think of aging in the way that they think about diseases. With diseases, they think, okay, some people get them, some people don't get them, therefore maybe we can cure them. And of course, we have become quite good at that. But then, of course, there are the diseases of aging, like Alzheimer's or almost all cancers, or, osteoporosis, heart disease. These things are not infections. They are caused by the way that the body normally works. In other words, they're actually part of aging. It's just that we have given them disease-like names, and yet we think we can cure them, right? So it doesn't make any sense logically to take the attitude that aging is somehow not something we can ever do anything about. Of course, also, we have to remember that the human body is a machine. It's a very complicated machine, but it's still a machine. So we can look at other machines and ask, well, how do we manage to stop them from aging? If we look at cars, for example, we know that it's possible to take a car and make it last forever just by doing sufficiently thorough preventative maintenance on it. So that's why we have cars today that were built more than 100 years ago, and they're working just as well as when they were built, even though they were not designed to last more than 10 or 15 years.
Bueno, sobre lo que me acabas de responder surge otra pregunta. Eh, en tus palabras, para ti, ¿qué es la vejez? ¿Qué es el envejecimiento? Para ti, ¿cómo lo describirías?
Right, so my preferred definition of aging is this. Aging is the lifelong accumulation of changes to the body's molecular and cellular structure that the body can tolerate only a certain amount of. So eventually, when there is more of that change than what the body is set up to tolerate, we start to get sick and eventually we die. So aging is simply the accumulation of self-inflicted damage.
Bueno, lo entiendo. Quería saber esto, ya que veo que hay un debate entre la comunidad científica y también en el pensamiento de las personas, el común de la población, sobre si el envejecimiento debe considerarse en sí mismo una enfermedad o debe considerarse otro tipo de proceso. Así que me interesaba mucho conocer en tus palabras cómo lo describirías para ilustrar un poco a las personas que aún tienen este debate de cómo se debería considerar el envejecimiento para las personas. ¿Tú estás de acuerdo con que se considere la vejez
So
como
let
una
me actually
enfermedad?
answer that because there isn't really a debate about this among the expert community. The debate is about what words we should use, not about what aging is. Everybody agrees that aging is a medical condition, that it's bad for you. It makes you sick. There is indeed a question about whether we should call it a disease, but that's just a question of semantics.
Ya, lo entiendo. Gracias por aclarar este punto. Quisiera también preguntarte, en tu investigación y en el tiempo que llevas investigando el envejecimiento, ¿has visto algo que ya empiece a ser prometedor o que empiece a darnos un vistazo de que a futuro vamos a tener una solución a esta problemática en un futuro cercano? ¿Podrías tal vez contarnos algunas cosas que hayas visto que pueden llegar a ser prometedoras en los próximos años?
Oh yes, there have been many that have got better, that where we have made progress. Remember that from my definition of aging, we have to remember that there are lots of different types of damage that the body does to itself. So that means that we have to develop lots of different strategies, lots of different treatments to repair those types of damage. That means that when I say there has been progress, I'm looking generally at individual types of damage, and we need progress in lots of places in order to have a good effect. It's only now that we are starting to be in the position of being able to combine these treatments in the same animal at the same time. We are doing a big experiment in mice right now with 1,000 mice and combining 4 different treatments to see what happens. And I expect that we will have to do a number of those experiments, combining different treatments, in order to have a big impact on mouse lifespan. And then we'll be able to move to human beings.
Eso está bastante interesante y prometedor. Me alegra mucho que estemos logrando estos avances en el estudio del envejecimiento. Tengo una pregunta hacia usted que es respecto a algunos temas que vamos a tratar en el documental, como algunas sustancias naturales o algunos compuestos que tal vez estén ya incluidos en la naturaleza, que podrían facilitarnos un cuidado a la hora de tener más longevidad o tratar algunos temas causados por el envejecimiento. No sé qué opina usted acerca de esto y si considera que la ciencia está dándole la suficiente atención a esta parte natural de algunos compuestos que podrían acortar el camino hacia esta meta de la longevidad.
So there are some natural substances that are good for you, but they only make a very small impact. They may perhaps extend people's lives by a year or two if people take those natural things throughout their whole life. But if you start taking those things when you are already 60 years old, for example, then there is going to be less benefit. Furthermore, different people have somewhat different metabolisms, and different things are good for different people. So the answer is kind of a little bit, there is benefit, but really it's not where we should be putting most of our focus. Most of our focus should be on new treatments that will have a big benefit for everybody.
Ok, comparto parte de su opinión al respecto. Y nosotros tenemos también el pensamiento de que la naturaleza en sus millones de años de evolución ha logrado solucionar algunas problemáticas que nosotros, a través de nosotros mismos, no hemos logrado resolver, como algunos seres o algunos microorganismos que han encontrado algunas formas de inmortalidad biológica, por decirlo de algún modo. ¿Tú crees que podemos aprender de esto y aplicar algunas cosas de estas soluciones que ha encontrado la naturaleza por sí misma para nosotros mismos aprender cómo lograr esta inmortalidad biológica también?
Yes and no. Certainly, it is very valuable to look at the living world and to get ideas from it, because evolution has invented a lot of things. However, we should be a bit more creative than just looking for very long-lived or immortal species and asking how they did it. The reason we must be more creative is because, in general, these long-lived or immortal species do not have the same structure that we have. For example, maybe they don't have any brains. Now, I'm quite fond of my brain. I don't want to sacrifice it in order to live forever. So that we have to take into account things like that, or the fact that some of these very long-lived species live in very, very cold environments, which we don't. Usually they are not warm-blooded. However, on the other side, on the good side, there are some ideas that evolution has had which may be useful. For example, there is a type of rodent called the naked mole rat, which has a very clever way to avoid getting cancer, even though it lives a long, long time. And that is being explored by colleagues of mine, and it may end up being useful to prevent cancer in human beings. Similarly, some bacteria have developed ways to break down certain chemicals that human beings cannot break down, and some of those chemicals accumulate in the body, and they cause things like blindness. So we have developed and identified such enzymes from bacteria that break down this waste material and would prevent blindness. And that has been a very successful project, which is going to move to clinical trials quite soon.
Wow, no tenía conocimiento total sobre lo que me estás contando ahora. Es algo bastante interesante y más si ya pronto va a tener pruebas médicas, creo que puede salir algo muy trascendental de todo esto. Me alegra mucho este tipo de descubrimientos que se van logrando gracias a esta investigación. Y también me genera otra pregunta que lo he tratado incluso con otros expertos que estarán en el documental y la mayoría de personas con las que he hablado de temas de longevidad y de estos estudios me dicen que existe una especie de falta de financiamiento para los estudios y para las investigaciones sobre longevidad. ¿Podrías explicarme un poco por qué falta este financiamiento, por qué no genera el suficiente interés para que haya un buen flujo económico que contribuya a que se logren estos descubrimientos o acortar un poco este camino? ¿Y cómo podríamos afrontar esto para que no exista esta falta de dinero para estas cosas?
Well, first of all, let me emphasize that there is a great deal more money in this field now than there was even 5 or 10 years ago. Things have got a lot better. However, that new money is very unevenly distributed. It is going to some of the areas that we need to pursue in repairing the damage of aging, but some other areas are still getting almost no money. So, yes, there is very much still a problem. If you ask why, ultimately, it comes back to the very first question you asked me. What is the reason why aging is not, considered even to be a bad thing? And people think it's inevitable. So I have to spend a lot of my time explaining to people that no, aging is not inevitable, that it's a medical problem which is amenable to medical intervention eventually, and therefore the sooner we work on that, we get those treatments, the more lives we will save. So we have a moral imperative as well as an economic imperative to develop these therapies and to invest in the necessary research.
Lo entiendo. Dejando a un lado el tema de la financiación, ¿cuál dirías que es el principal obstáculo que han encontrado en lograr descubrir la forma de curar o revertir el envejecimiento? ¿Cuál es el principal obstáculo que enfrentan hoy en día para esto, dejando de un lado el tema de la financiación?
Well, of course, the science is very difficult. So it's pioneering technology. We do not know how it is, how long it's going to take until we succeed. It's the same with any pioneering technology. So really, that's the answer to your question. But of course, funding is really the only other problem. If we had enough money, then the only barrier would be the technical challenge of the actual science. At the moment, we certainly need to educate the public about this and educate governments, of course, as well. But really, once these treatments are developed, everybody will want them. It's just that people currently want to keep believing that these treatments are impossible. They don't want to get their hopes up.
Claro, lo entiendo. Como hemos vivido realmente toda la vida, toda la historia de la humanidad, enfrentando la vejez y la muerte, ya lo asumimos como algo común, como algo que es parte de la vida y que es inevitable. Y tal vez por eso ocurren todas estas cosas que me estás mencionando. Habría que cambiar la perspectiva global de las personas con respecto a esto y creo que es una tarea un poco difícil, pero no es imposible. Así que eso da algo de esperanza, al menos a futuro. Eh, lo otro que quisiera saber, volviendo un poco atrás, tú mencionaste algo sobre el cáncer. Hablan mucho de que el cáncer es el gran enemigo de la vida, pero también algunos dicen que el cáncer podría ser un gran aliado en la búsqueda de esta inmortalidad biológica. ¿Podrías explicarme un poco al respecto? ¿A qué se refieren con esto?
Yeah, I don't like to describe cancer that way. As far as I am concerned, cancer is part of aging. But when people do use the kind of language that you just quoted, what they mean is that cancer is a form of cellular immortality, where cells can divide and divide and divide without stopping. Now, in that sense, aging is a kind of war, a kind of trade off between cancer and degeneration, where the body defends itself against cancer by down regulating, by shutting down its regenerative capacity that existed early in life. And so, if we could completely cure cancer, then fixing the rest of aging would actually be a lot easier than it is now. We would be able to restore the regenerative capacity that we have before birth, for example, or in very early life, and that would solve most of our problems. But of course, we have not yet been able to cure cancer. So a lot of my work involves trying to do that, trying to separate cancer from the rest of aging.
Bueno, gracias por esa aclaración sobre lo del cáncer. Utilicé el lenguaje que he visto que han utilizado muchos, que se pronuncian al respecto de la longevidad y hablan demasiado del cáncer y de cómo estas células han encontrado un cierto tipo de inmortalidad biológica y cómo podríamos usar esto o aprender de esto para nosotros. Eh, Me gusta mucho saber tu respuesta acerca de este tema y vengo con una pregunta más que es sobre algunas personas que están en contra de esto de curar la vejez o de revertir el envejecimiento y siempre usan el mismo argumento cuando están en contra de esto y siempre dicen qué vamos a hacer con la sobrepoblación. ¿Qué respuesta tendrías tú al respecto siempre que mencionan el tema de la sobrepoblación, llegado un momento en el que ya no haya vejez?
Yes, this is probably the most frequent thing people say to argue that aging is some kind of blessing in disguise. And of course, it's complete nonsense. The uh, problems we have today of having too many people on the earth are not a problem of not having enough space for everybody. They're a problem of pollution, of putting too much carbon into the atmosphere and such like. But of course, we are right now developing other technologies that will solve those problems. Will remove carbon, or will, for example, artificial meat will limit the release of greenhouse gases. Of course, we're developing bacteria that will eat plastics. We are developing cheap desalination for fresh water, all of these things. So there's no way that it makes any sense to say, oh, we should not fix aging because we will have too many people. And the same applies to all of the other reasons why people say that aging is a blessing in disguise. Things like, if we didn't have aging, dictators would live forever, or death gives meaning to life, things like that. So really we have to ask, why are people saying these obviously ridiculous things? And of course, it's the same as why people say aging is inevitable and it is kind of off limits to medicine. Again, it's a way of putting aging out of one's mind and not getting one's hopes up. People are terrified of aging, and the only way they can cope is to pretend that they're not terrified.
Claro, lo entiendo y yo personalmente yo opino que una vida más larga daría incluso más sentido a la propia vida y también contribuiría al ambiente, porque al estar más tiempo aquí necesitamos tener un hogar mucho más lindo, mucho más limpio y estaríamos realmente obligados a cuidar más del mundo si vamos a vivir en él por mucho más tiempo. Ya no sería vivir solo un corto periodo y dejar los problemas que surjan para la próxima generación, sino que seguiríamos aquí. Sí, por lo tanto, tendríamos que cuidar mucho más el planeta y creo que aumentaría nuestra conciencia, aumentaría muchas cosas, sería algo demasiado positivo, muchísimo más positivo que envejecer y morir en poco tiempo.
Yeah, people have said that maybe expect to live longer, we will have a longer um, timeline of priorities. We will think ahead more. I'm not so sure that's true, though. I think that generally people just have faith that problems that we create now, we will develop technologies to solve them in the future. And usually they are correct about that. So it's hard to persuade people to be less short-termist. However, the real thing I want to emphasize is that this is not about longevity. This is about health. What I do is medical research. Longevity is simply a side effect of health.
Me encanta mucho esa frase de que la longevidad es un efecto secundario de la salud. Creo que le da más sentido a todo esto y nos permite comprenderlo mejor. Doctor de Grey, ¿cómo visualiza usted el futuro en los próximos 20 años, que tal vez tengamos ya más avanzada esta tecnología para la reversión de la vejez y para lograr esta salud y esta longevidad derivada de la salud? ¿Cómo visualiza usted ese futuro? ¿Cuál sería la siguiente etapa en el desarrollo humano si logramos estas metas?
I don't really think about the distant future. I just, I'm a first things first kind of guy. I am simply interested in solving the number one problem that humanity has today. I know for a fact that even in the distant future, nobody will want to get sick. Nobody will want to get sick in the future. So I'm just trying to create a world in which nobody does get sick just because they were born a long time ago.
Esa me parece que es una visión demasiado linda del futuro. Un futuro donde las personas no enfermen solo por la edad que tengan. Creo que permitiría disfrutar mucho más de la vida. Me gusta mucho esta visión que tienes del futuro. Y una última cosa que me gustaría pedirte es, ¿qué mensaje le darías a nuestra audiencia? ¿Qué mensaje compartirías con nosotros acerca de la investigación para lograr esta longevidad, esta salud? ¿Qué te gustaría decir para que las personas tomen en cuenta y cada uno brinde su apoyo o brinde su pequeño grano de arena para contribuir a que esto sea posible?
My main message is this. Aging is by far the largest source of suffering in the world these days, as well as the major source of death. It kills three-quarters of us that we die of aging. So that means that the sooner we stop people from getting sick as they get old, the more suffering we will prevent. Anybody who wants to do good in the world should be trying to solve the problem of aging because it is the problem that causes the most suffering.
Muchas gracias, doctor De Grey, por compartir su pensamiento y sus conocimientos con nosotros y brindarnos estas respuestas tan acertadas y tan buenas en esta entrevista. La verdad, personalmente me llenan de bastante esperanza porque yo tengo la esperanza de poder disfrutar y alcanzar a ver estos logros. Soy muy joven ahora, así que espero también seguir manteniendo esta juventud. Eh, comparto mucho su visión y le quiero agradecer enormemente por haber dedicado su tiempo para estar con nosotros en este momento y compartir todo esto. Así que, de verdad, muchas gracias.
and I thank you for inviting me to talk to you.